Hello everyone, Reza here. Welcome to the second part of facial rigging for beginners in Maya series. Now in this video we are going to go over skinning process, all those tips and tricks, and get our skeleton bind to the geometry. So without any further ado, let's begin. Now let's see how we can bind the skeleton to this geometry right here. First things first, I don't need to have the hair and the eyebrows visible, so I'm going to press H on them. Now I do have inner mouth components, so if I select the face and hide it, you can see I've got the upper gum and teeth, lower gum and teeth, and two eyes. Let's skin those first. They're fairly straightforward. There is no smooth deformation about them, so it's literally selecting them and bind them using the hierarchy method. So I'm going to select the teeth, and upper gum, upper jaw last, and then go to skin, bind skin, reset the tool, make sure bind to selected joints, and then bind method, closest distance, and max influence set to 2, and apply. With that, the gum and upper teeth are going to follow the orientation of the upper jaw. I'm going to do the same thing for the lower jaw. Select the 2, select the lower jaw, apply. I'm going to do the same thing for the teeth. In here, I'm just going to bring the face back, select the JNTLI01, shift select the geometry and apply. In the other side, select JNTRI, shift select the geometry and apply. Let's test them really quick. So for the upper jaw, the joint, you can see now the eye follows the orientation of the eye bone. In here, that should be the case. Nice. And for the lower jaw, if I hide, the component should follow the lower jaw. Don't worry about the tongue. We will kind of deal with it later. It's fairly simple and straightforward. Now to the actual smooth deformation. I'm going to select the upper jaw and shift select the lower jaw and the head bone and the neck bone and the geometry last. I'm going to go to skin, bind skin, reset the tool, bind to selected joints, obviously. Bind method, you can do either heat map if your geometry is clean, or if you run into some errors, or if your scene slowing down, geodesic voxel. Because it's voxel based, this method, it's more accurate, heavier to run at the same time. Of course, max influence of 5 is too much. I'm going to reduce this down to probably 3. We already covered this extensively in our intermediate rigging series, so feel free to watch that. That should do the trick. So with that, I'm going to press bind skin. Now you can see that usually that's the case when you bind the skin for the facial rigging. It's not ideal. So what you get is nowhere close to finish, and we've got a lot of polishing to do. Now you may have noticed that I did not assign our eyelids. The reason I didn't apply or assign our eyelids at the same time is because I would like to add them as an influence with 0 weights. That produces or creates a much cleaner workflow for me, where Maya doesn't just dump a bunch of random numbers on these vertices. It's just a cleanup that I just don't need to do. So let's move on to the next chapter, and I will show you how to add these eyelids as an extra influence for a much cleaner approach to skinning. Now let's select all 4, shift select the geometry. And in case if you're wondering what do I mean by adding as an influence, if you look at the skin right now, we've got upper, lower, head, neck, and no sign of eyelid joints. Now I would like to have them included, but with no influence on the geometry just yet. So with the 4 of these guys selected, I'm going to select the mesh itself. I'm going to go to skin, edit influence, add influence, option box. Now we do not wish to have use geometry enabled. We're using joints. And now here's the important part. And if you forget to tweak that, it basically defeats the purpose. We want to lock the weight of these 4 with the weight value of 0. So they are there, they are part of the skin, but they have no influence whatsoever. And that allows us and that enables us to kind of draw and paint the influence manually on the surrounding vertices, a much cleaner workflow. So I'm going to go add. Now if I look at the skin, if I double click, you can see those 4 here, no influence on any points whatsoever, and that allows us to paint our own influence when the time comes. We just need to unlock them. Perfect. Now our scene is ready to go for polishing stage. So let's get to polishing the influence, painting weights, and we will finish this session very soon and moving on to controllers. All right, so you already know, if you've already watched my tutorials, you know that I have 3 main tools that I use. One is paint weight tool, which is fairly straightforward, and this is something that I'm going to use definitely. Also, another favorite of mine is component editor, where you select points, see the influence here and the association with each bone, and you tweak it that way. And to put final touches, you use hammer skin weight tool to your points. So let's get started. You have 2 ways of doing this. I'm just going to make sure that bone selection has been disabled. You can actually enable it for now and create a keyframe just so you know how to apply influences. I'm going to go to another frame, kind of move this up. And if you think this is not how you envision the character opening up his mouth, then you can always tweak that later. For now, we just need to have a starting point. So that's how we wish to have that for now. Probably I'm going to go to 35 if you think that's better. But again, with your geometry, that value may change. Now from here, I'm going to go and disable bone selection, and you can actually select all of these vertices, and you can even move forward and include some of these verts. And I know for a fact, I'm going to hold down Shift and Control. I know for a fact that some of these guys actually do follow the position of the upper jaw. So that's one approach. Another way of doing this is to actually go and enable symmetry. So when you select one half like so, the other half also gets selected, which is totally acceptable. I'm going to go ahead and make sure that camera base selection, or even camera base selection for marquee, is on. So I'm not going to kind of make that mistake by selecting back faces, something like that. Speaking of which, probably we don't need any of these. So at the moment we're blocking the weight, so I don't want to spend too much time on it. I'm just going to move that over here. That should do it for the first pass. I'm going to go to component editor, and look at that. Some of these points are even following the head or the neck bone. This is crazy. They should follow the upper jaw. So we have the upper jaw here. Select the first one, scroll all the way down to the very last one, shift click, and I'm going to put a value of 1. Look what happened here. Voila. So single click. We haven't even gotten to the polishing stage yet, but see how quickly component editor can fix some of these problems. You can always do the same thing with the neck, where you select a bunch of points. I can hold down Shift greater than sign to grow the selection, and I can probably deselect some of these points because we can, this is the area that probably we need smooth deformation, and I don't want to have really rigid, harsh deformation, but these selected vertices, I'm pretty sure they're going to follow the neck bone. So I'm going to use the same trick. I'm going to say, well, we don't want them to follow the head. We don't want them to follow the upper jaw. We want them to follow the neck bone. So, and by default, some of them are having the value of 1, which is great. I'm going to press 1, and now they are going to follow the neck bone. So this is the approach for some of the, basically that's how I use component editor in a short version. Now, if I go and with the mesh selected, go to the paint weight tool, that's where we actually start smoothing some of the deformation here. So you can see that we do not have any values on the upper and lower lid, and that's fine because so far we are aiming to polish what we have right now, and only then we move on to the upper lid and the lower lid. Now, another strategy that I always use is to select some of these loops. If you have a clean topology, then that's going to be a huge help. So if I go to the wireframe so you guys get to see what's going on, I can actually select some of these points and control right click, two vertices, and if I go in here, I can use hammer weight to fix some of these stretchinesses. So for example, this would be a really great area for me to use hammer weight tool. Obviously I wanted to exclude the ear, and probably this bit unnecessary, and this bit unnecessary. And this happens when the part that I said you need to be mindful of the smooth deformation. So look, with that area selected, I can just go hammer skin weight and voila. Now if you think, well, I need this to move into the negative Z axis, that's easy. You select the 2, or with that 2 selected, you go to the component editor and you say, well, if you wish this to follow the upper jaw, then go ahead and add more values. It adds more volume, or reduces volume rather. So I'm going to put 0.1 in here, then I'm going to go in here. This adds more volume. And you can go in here and say, well, are they going to follow the upper jaw? If the answer is yes, then I'm going to change the value. You can kind of tweak around, sculpt your result, which is absolutely mind-blowing. So this is really, really cool. One of my favorite methods when I'm blocking the skin. Now, it's always a good idea to actually be in one, not smooth mode when you paint weights, and just switch or toggle to smooth mode just for the preview. Well, another common way of doing this is to go to the paint weight tool. So I'm going to switch to here, and I make sure that I'm not using a value of 1. This is way too much. Probably value of 0.3. Holding down B to fix my brush. Probably increase that to something like 0.8. Mode set to paint, and paint operation set to replace, and I start tweaking the result. If you think, and this is the case, if you think this is too much, then you can always go back down. We have smooth as well for you to kind of smooth some of these points if you're kind of not happy with the result. So you can see immediately we're getting some really, really nice result. So that's basically, that is it for the process. And remember, skinning and tweaking the influence takes the longest. You're not supposed to finalize 100%. You can always go to up to 70% and plant all the controllers and go back and fix the skin. You can see that we've got a lot of stretching happening in here, which you can easily fix. I can actually put a value of 2, come over here, fix some of these values, move this up a little. And another thing to be mindful of is you don't need to do both sides. You can do one side and mirror the influence to the other side. And this is something that we covered in character rigging for beginners and intermediate character rigging at the same time. Oops. So that's another thing to be mindful of. I'm going to go with the smooth again and kind of change this influence a little. Make sure that there is no stretchiness going on here. As you can see, we want to kind of relax those muscles a little, make sure they have really organic and nice deformation. And that's something that we want to be mindful of. Constantly go back and forth, press 3, and see if the result is something that you want. Now I'm going to spend some time and I'm going to tweak some of these. But at the same time, before I finish this lesson, I would like to show you how to go about the eyelids as well. So I'm going to put the rest of this character on hold, do it after I finish this video. But let's focus on the eyelids and see how we can kind of tweak those and bring those to position the way that we want. So that ensures us that when we put all the controllers in place, we have a nice blink for our character. So move on to the next chapter. All right, let's get to the eyelids and fix that part. So if I select the geometry and enable paint weight tool, you can see we have no influence coming from the eyelid bones to vertices or surrounding vertices. So we need to get that fixed. Well, first things first, I need to insert a keyframe on one of these guys. I'm going to start with the upper lid and Shift E to have values to insert a keyframe in a timeline. You can also, if you wish, you can just insert a keyframe on rotate Z, and then I'm going to go forward 15 frames, and you can see I already have some animation. So I'm going to select everything. Well, I'm going to select the upper and going to mute selected. Going to select lower and mute selected. The reason I'm not deleting them because I'm not done yet. So far I'm just deactivating the keyframes. That's how you deactivate it. And now it allows me to just focus on what I have here, which is the eyelid. I don't want both eyelids to meet halfway. It's more of a realistic approach. With stylized, well, it really depends on the style that you have, but I would like for this character, I would like the upper lid to go all the way down, not 100% all the way, but at least 70% all the way. So maybe minus 60 or minus 65 is something that I want. Yeah, minus 65 looks good. And now we have the animation. Obviously it's not working because, well, the geometry, or rather the eyelids, don't have any influence. Now, first things first, you cannot start painting weights because, well, they're locked. So select all of them, all 4, Shift, select all 4, and just tap once or click once on the padlock to unlock them. Now you can paint weight, and the choice is yours. You can just start painting weight, or you can go with the other method that I demonstrated, which is the component editor, and add influence and sculpt rather the influence manually. I tend to isolate, so I have access to both sides. Makes it a lot easier to select vertices, and if you think that's possible to switch to one mode, then it makes it even easier to select vertices. Another option you have is just to double click, make sure camera based selection is enabled, so you're not selecting any back faces when you are applying or adding influence. So basically that's the job, and you select each point. You come over here and you can see we don't have any influence assigned to the upper lid. So what should we do? In this case, you go to tick off hide 0 column, so that gives you access to all the joints, and that's it. So JNTL upper lid 01. and you start adding influence. You can just basically start with just a few points, add subtle values. The influence can be subtle, and just take it from there. So I'm going to continue with these guys, JNTL upper lid, probably assign a value of 3. Gonna select these guys and upper lid value of 4, and you can see really quickly that I'm actually planning on kind of easing into it. I'm blocking out some of these weights and influences that I'm applying. It's just I'm testing to see how the deformation is going to look like. Chances are for the upper ring you use a lower value, and for the ring above that you use even a lower value. Obviously some of these values you can go to extreme up to 90% or 99%, but at the moment I just want to pull them down equally and then only then sculpt them. So maybe 0.5 on these guys, and don't worry about the stretchiness, just to demonstrate that this is no big deal. Since we have enough supporting edge loops, you can always lower them down. So probably 0.4 for these guys, for now 0.3, and you can see how easy that is to just lower the kind of influence on some of these guys and not to have any stretching happening, like so. And this is pretty much how you should approach this with component editor. It may take just a tad longer than Paint Weight tool, but I actually quite like this type of adding influence, because it allows you to kind of direct the look the way that you want and kind of sculpt the deformation, for lack of a better word. So very, very flexible approach, and you know, this is without a doubt one of my favorite way of applying painting weights or applying influence without using a plugin. Again, if you're using a plugin, that's a completely different story, but the whole idea behind this course is to show you how to do things manually, and only then we can just make use of some really cool easy to use plugins to speed up our workflow. So I'm just going to set some time aside and gradually but surely moving some of these points up just to have a nice blink effect for our character. So very efficient, really easy to sculpt, and basically that's how you work around it. Now I did one for one eyelid. Once we come back, I'm gonna show you how to transfer the influence from one side to another, so you don't need to spend time and add influence on the other upper lids and lower lid bones. You can just do it on one eye and mirror it to the negative X or the other side of the character to save tons of time. All right, time to mirror the influence. You can see I've gone ahead and fixed things for one eye and added the exact same animation for the bones, for the eyelid bones for the other side. I also, if I just mute or unmute rather, these bones here, so unmute selected and unmute selected. If I look at the animation, you can see I've created a nice crease, and this is something that again with component editor is really easy. You just go and really sculpt the weight the way that you want. I did the same thing. If I just isolate this, you can see I've gone ahead and looked at the eyes as well. And if you see there's a little bit of gap in here, you can always go ahead and fix those too. So sometimes the method I use is to just go to the other side or inside the eye. If I bring the component editor here, you can see, for example, I've got the upper lid and the lower lid. You know, I can just give this guy more for the lower lid and close the gap that way. And that's what I mean by saying sculpting, because you really can achieve the result that you really like in no time at all. So no, that's done, and everything is ready to go. I'm just gonna go back to the bookmark that I have, and now I'm ready to just go ahead and mirror one side to the other side. To do that, you need to select the geometry and go to Skin, Mirror Skin Weight tool, and definitely option box. Now there are many ways of doing this. One way is to actually create a label, and this is more of an advanced tutorial, is to create a label here and use a label and attach that to the closest point. So it's going to be label to the closest point if you were to create a label for your joint. But at the moment we do not have any label, and that's why we are going to use, well, first things first, YZ, positive to negative, raycast, and if you have a symmetrical model, then 1-to-1 should do the trick. And I tend to have organize on as well. Make sure to select your model as well, and then I go mirror. Now if I go and play my time slider, you can see now these two sides are identical, and I'm going to select these two guys and again mute the keyframe so we get to see the blink as well. Blink is working beautifully. So admittedly I have had moments when I didn't really like the mirroring result, and if that happens to you, then take some time and make sure to kind of tweak the other side. I guess I was lucky this time around. It really worked beautifully for me. I have no problem with it. But again, this is something to be mindful of. I can see there's a slight movement in these two areas if you pay close attention, and it's coming from an influence from these bones to here. So it was just half an hour that I spent on this rig, and riggers in studios spent days on tweaking and finessing the influence. Take your time, don't rush into this process, but be mindful of the fact you can always go back to this stage and fine-tune this either through the manual adding influence mirroring to the other side, or by doing corrective blend shapes, which we are going to have a look at later this course. That is it for skinning. I hope you enjoyed this tutorial, and see you guys in the next video when we start adding control curves to our character. Very exciting, so see you in a bit.